but I've been talking about some of the really amazing things that we've accomplished over the course of the last 4 years, and some of the where we're heading, the things that are coming up. And there are lots of things that I think are important and of interest to all of you as young people, because from where I sit, pretty much all issues are young people issues. No matter, it really just depends on how you approach things. And there, as I said, there have been some really amazing things that we've accomplished over the course of the last 4 years, and that's really building on past leadership, the work of leadership of citizens. And I want to acknowledge the leadership that our youth have played within the Métis Nation of Ontario, and that's helped, I think, move our conversations forward. So my focus really has been on building strong communities and supporting community. It's absolutely focused on advancing and protecting Métis rights, and it's very much been focused on moving us forward on that vision that our ancestors established to really be the people who govern themselves, to be a self-determining, self-governing people. But in terms of those accomplishments, things like our harvesting framework agreement and the kinds of things we were able to cement in that, eliminating the cap on harvesters. And I know some of you are active harvesters as well, so I wanted to acknowledge that. The framework agreement that we signed for the whole of the MNO to help move forward our conversations around self-government, but also the framework agreement that we signed for our Northwestern Ontario Métis community. We don't talk about that enough. It's a really big deal, because that history that comes out of Northwestern Ontario, it's the only example of Métis signing treaty as Métis people in the entire history of Canada, on the planet. And so that's a big deal. And of course, those promises that were made in Treaty 3 were broken. The half-breed adhesion to Treaty 3 were broken. And so that framework agreement that we signed between the MNO, our Northwestern Ontario community, and Canada is really, it's like we brought forward PALI as a test case to prove Métis rights. That framework agreement is a test case to establish a claims process for historic grievances all across Ontario. So there's a lot riding on that and finding resolution there. And of course, our core self-government agreement. So when we signed that last June, we weren't the only ones that signed. We signed with two other sister Métis governments, the Métis Nation Saskatchewan and the Métis Nation of Alberta. And that agreement that we signed, it was the first, again, the first ever on the history of the planet, first agreement that would recognize a Métis government by the federal government. And it is any one of those things that I just listed off, even if we accomplished just one of those over the course of a 4-year term, it would have been a big deal. The fact that we've accomplished all of that and more, I think is really outstanding. And there's so much more that we can do. One of the things that we were able to do over the course of the last 4 years is, thanks to the work that we're doing at a national level and being a party to the Canada Métis Nation Accord, we've signed a bunch of sub-accords, including one that I'm really excited about, which is a sub-accord on post-secondary education. So for the very first time in our history as a people, there are going to be post-secondary education funds coming to the Métis Nation of Ontario to support our students going to post-secondary education, going to grad school, going to post-grad studies. And I think that in and of itself is, again, a huge accomplishment for the Métis Nation of Ontario. And I think that that's going to mean a lot to our young people. So we've got a lot of really exciting work ahead of us. As we move forward on that path towards self-government, we're going to be doing a lot of engagement. We're going to be coming out, we're going to be talking with citizens all around the province about constitution building, about essentially in the constitution building process, we're setting the vision for what our future Métis government is going to look like. And in doing that work, it's going to require a whole lot of conversation. It's going to require us asking a lot of questions. Some of them are really hard questions, but we need to dig into that stuff. And from where I sit, and I've said this always, I think that the voices of young people are really, really important in all of those processes, because not only are you showing leadership today, but certainly whatever it is that we build in terms of a Métis government, 20 years from now, I'm not going to be the one sitting in that chair. It's going to be one of you. And we really need to get young people involved early on in these discussions to help form that vision of what we want our government to look like into the future. So I'm really looking forward to tonight's conversation. And I have, as I've been saying throughout this election process, I'm really looking forward to working with all of our citizens and all of our youth, our young people, to really build a stronger, more engaged, more accountable, and awesome Métis government to serve our people and our communities. So that is my opening for our conversation tonight. And as Mitch was saying, I actually have a lot of questions for you, because I'm hoping that this is really going to be a dialogue. But I'm going to leave that there and turn it back over to MC Mitch, which is his rap name. If you can imagine Mitch rapping.
One thing I really appreciated in my law degree was working through the MAG that one summer doing the Dubwaywan program.
Yeah.
Because I had an opportunity to work for a governance structure or in relation to it. It'd be really interesting to see if there could be ways that, I don't know, if there could be other internship opportunities for different types of programs, or just a list of opportunities that could go out to students in terms of like how they can get involved in the governance structure, or just in a job related to the M&O.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed doing that, and it opened my eyes to a lot of different things. So that's just one thought I have.
Yeah, I think so. What Kelly's talking about are summer internship positions that were that came out of some work that I was on a province-wide level committee implementing a report that this Big Wheel, former Supreme Court guy, issued around our justice system. And one of the things in there was the establishment of these summer jobs. And Kelly was able to do that for her. She applied and got one of these internship positions. And there actually are lots of those kinds of positions that are out there. And I think it's a good point, Kelly, about pulling all of that information together and making sure that it's accessible to our young people so that they know we don't have to recreate these things. In some cases we do. And it's one of the things I'm really proud of is the fact that we've established an internship program within the M&O. That was one of my goals, and I'm glad that we've got it. In fact, we've got some really incredible people that are still continue to work with. We've managed to suck them into our public service, and they continue to be a part of that. That's very much the intent of that. But there are all these other programs and internships out there that I think it's about opening the doors, making sure that students are aware of them so that they have the opportunity to connect and know where those opportunities are. And I think that that's something that wouldn't be that hard to do, especially if we had students feeding information into the M&O and making it accessible. And I'm thinking in particular, Hannah, about the role of post-secondary rep as an example that you might actually, there you go. So Hannah is your new post-secondary rep on the PCM&O. And I think that's a really great thing that Hannah could be doing, right? Is having young people feed in things like Kelly saying, hey, guess what? There are these Dubwaywan internships for law students. They happen every summer. Here's who you connect with, and starting to create a bit of a folder that can be accessible for people. And there's going to be other examples of that too. So, and that's all at the post-secondary level. And I'm assuming that we could probably think about doing something similar as well for the secondary school level as well. Yeah, I think that's good. And again, building out our internal internship programs as well. So one of the things that I'd really wanted to do over the course of the last term, but there really wasn't enough support to do it, is not just doing the internship program, but to actually have governance internships. And in particular, one thing that I really want to see, and come heck or high water, we're going to make it happen this term, are the establishment of basically like a leadership intern position, a position where young people would be able to shadow me in my job. Because I think that over the course of a 4-year term, you could provide an opportunity for several Métis youth to do that, to actually shadow the president, to attend meetings, to help prepare me for meetings, to help do follow-up, and to get into the rooms and be a part of listening in on those conversations. I think that that's something that I'm really excited about. Opportunities that I never had as a kid, but I think to Kelly's point, being able to see a little bit of the governance and an opportunity, a window into that, I think would be really important. Thank you. That's a great idea. Okay, I just wanted to come back to, because I think it's really important, this piece that Mitch just raised, and Hannah, I wanted to acknowledge you and your gumption of standing up at the assembly and speaking out when you saw something that wasn't right. And that I wanted to say thank you for that. Like, seriously, merci for that, because that's something that's not easy to do. And it's not easy for anyone to do. And I think it can be particularly intimidating for a young person to do. So I wanted to acknowledge that leadership that you showed. And to also say that that is one of the things that we are absolutely working on and we know is an issue, is conduct. And we have in fact developed a draft code of conduct that is going to apply to all citizens, but in particular to people in elected roles, but it'll guide assemblies and all of that, all of those types of, wherever it is that we gather. And so that's something that is in the process of being developed. And so I wanted to just put that on the table to say, I hear what you're saying and the concern around conduct. And I thought it was really powerful when, as a young person, you were able to stand up and call that behavior out. I thought it was very, very powerful. But I also wanted to come back to the thing that, Mitch, you were saying about the assembly that you were at, and France was there and able to speak to decision-making being part of our culture. And I think that's a really great point. And I love that France Picot actually stood up and said that to all of you. And I think that's leadership too, right? Is being able to have that direct link with young people to be able to make that connection. And I mean, obviously with France, that woman has been here literally since the MNO was created. She was on the very first council that agreed to come to the MNO, and she has, as you know, she's been in leadership positions for over 20 years within the Métis Nation of Ontario, serving on PCMNO and serving all of our citizens. And actually serving as chair or previously as vice chair. And as I'm sure that you can all appreciate, sometimes our meetings and events can be quite lively. One of the things that we're really good at as Métis people, I think it's actually hardwired, it's into our DNA, is speaking out, right? Talking about the things that are important to us. Debate is very important. Being able to, we have prized oration skills, I think, for centuries. And I think that that's just a really important part of who we are, that ability to come together in assemblies, that there's a real cultural foundation to that. And decision making is absolutely part of our culture, and being able to talk and talk through what can be really challenging issues. That's also a part of our culture. And I wanted to acknowledge France for her ability to actually chair a room like that and to keep things moving in a good way. I think that that's extraordinary, and I think that that's leadership. And it's been my honor to serve with her over the course of the last 4 years and to be able to watch her in action. So that piece, that decision making as part of our culture, I think is really important. And I think that's something that that we want to keep coming back to, and making sure that we're creating space and involving young people in those environments, in our assemblies, in our community councils, and the decision making that happens there. And I think that's one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is, I mean, we're talking about cultural events, and that's really important, that foundation of who we are and a deep understanding of that. And how do we, coming to Dalton's point around talking with Janet and others around getting young people involved at a community council level, getting them active in the youth council position. That's one of the things I know we've had some challenges with, in particular in some areas around the province. And I think that's something that I wanted to ask all of you. What could we be doing? What could I be doing as president of the MNO and God willing, future president of the MNO? What could I be doing to help create that space where young people are coming forward? We'll deal with the conduct piece, and that's something that I think is important. But what more can we be doing to really encourage young people to take up those community leadership roles at a local level?
The one thing that I was going to add to what Mitch was saying is that so something I think that the MNO could do to support the youth council in getting more involvement is to actually make it a little less daunting. And the way that has happened over my term was Lane, and was us having IPS money to hire Melissa. Yeah. So I'm going to preface that by saying, before all of that happened, this MNOYC was extremely lucky in that we went into it, we became friends and then family like immediately. And I think we've done a really good job at compensating for each other's busy times. I mean, I've watched Kelly go through law school, Jordy and Caitlin get a master's degree, me start a teaching career, Mitch start teaching at a university level. I've watched a lot of really amazing things happen from these people who are extremely busy and have been able to balance MNOYC and their own lives. And I think that part of that success is that we all respect each other when we say, listen, I'm turning off chat for 5 months and I will, or 2 months, and I will turn it back on, or I will answer it when I have time. And then the other ones were able to kind of step up. And I think the other really key piece to that was having a staff person, so that, you know, I think like young people know what they want, they know what they need to do. They just don't always have the time or the money or whatever to get it done. And so as soon as Lynn came on board, I think that was a really big sigh of relief for me, just knowing, okay, that is our point. That is how we get stuff done. I wasn't on the MNOYC previously, so I can't comment on previous presidential leadership, but I know having the open line of communication with you was something that really lightened our load and always made sure that we knew that our voice was being heard, and that someone was doing something about these things that we had that were ideas. And then the other key piece was that person, and Lane is awesome, and Lane has been an asset, and having Melissa for 2 years of IPS has been just like life changing, because sometimes something as simple as like putting out a social media post, okay, it's IPS, we can lean on Melissa, we're paying Melissa to do it, so we don't feel bad about it, we don't feel like we're burdening anybody, and we've been able to get a lot done. So that staff person.
And that support will continue, and I totally hear you, and I'm glad that we were able to do that this year, and I think it's important to do it moving forward. But the other thing I just wanted to acknowledge is I think it's been amazing to watch this youth council and the youth reps that have been active with it as well, how incredibly collaborative and complimenting folks have been. Like when some people have had to step back, others have stepped in. And it's just the depth of and the breadth of skill that has been brought to this work, I think, is really cool. And I think one of the things that I always really enjoy is hearing youth council talk at youth leadership conferences and elsewhere about how, you know, the fact that the youth council over the last several years have made all decisions after rigorous debate and only at a point where everyone's good with it. And I think that that's really, I think, extraordinary. And so I just wanted to say shout out to all of you for everything that you've brought to this work. And again, support will continue, but it's I know that it's a lot of work. I've done a lot of volunteer work in my time, and I get that. And I think it's all about dedication, but there's some serious skills that you folks and others have brought to this work. So thank you. One of the things that I would love to do is actually do exactly what we're doing now, more. And that's something that I can certainly commit myself to. And I think that might help as well, Yana, with what you're saying around young people that are coming in and they're doing some of the substantive work through Infinite Potentials. They might be involved at a cultural level in the local council, but they still may have questions on the bigger political pieces. And that's something that I know that I can help with. So that's something that I'm totally prepared to do. So how often, one of the things I'd like to ask you is, if we were to do this, if we were to have Zoom calls like this with young people from around the province, how often should we be doing that? Like every Tuesday night? That was a joke, Jeff.
I think people could probably commit to like every second month, I don't know, or like even once every 3 months, like 4 times a year, between 4 to 6 times a year.
Okay. So think about that. Think about that and let me know, because that's something that I am completely open to doing as often as we need to do it. I actually really enjoy talking with you guys. So I'm putting that on my list, and then I'm gonna look to you folks for some direction. Somewhere between every Tuesday night and once an election. Somewhere in between. No, I'm not saying that. We actually do. I've had a lot of conversations with young people over the course of the last 4 years, but I'd like to institutionalize that. Like I'd like to set up a tea with Margaret on a more regular basis. And in fact, maybe next time we do it, I will bring a beading project that I'm not very good at, but I'm working at it. And then we can do something like that together.
we talked about, I don't know if Kelly and Ali will remember, but we talked about, it had to have been this term because Paul was there, a conversation around sort of creating that sort of opportunity. And we were, I don't know what we call it. It was almost like a study hall or something like that. We were gonna be sharing resources in terms of articles and books and those sorts of things. That it was sort of like like a Métis study hall kind of thing or whatever, and creating those opportunities for various members of not only the MNOIC but of like the youth community as a whole to share their knowledge, expertise, whatever in all sorts of different things, right? And it just never seemed to take off. But maybe it's one of those things that like an idea comes up and the time isn't right, and then a couple years later somebody dusts it off and all of a sudden it's it's right. So maybe now's the time, right? And maybe that's something we can maybe as post-secondary rep want to take the lead on something like that, right? We can there's so many people in the community, not just in the youth community but in the MNO and across the Métis Nation as a whole, that I'm sure we could loop into doing those sorts of webinars or whatever, right?
A lot of our youth, one of their first introductions to Métis politics, if they haven't reached out to their local councils, is with the SYP program and attending the AGA. And my very first AGA was Peterborough, which was a very exciting one. And being an SYP, when you're in the crowd, you pick up on a lot of the kind of murmuring and a lot of the side comments, a lot of the eye rolls when people are speaking, including when the youth are speaking. And I find it can be quite discouraging and demoralizing to the youth. Like Hannah, who so boldly got up and spoke her truth, and thank you very much. As Margaret said, thank you for that. And I think moving forward, as we continue to have more conversations around constitution building and self-government, we are going to have those youth who will continue to have a strong voice, and won't get demoralized and will continue to speak out. But I'm worried that there are youth who are going to be demoralized and are just going to say, I don't want any part of this. And if that's their first introduction to Métis politics, that's really going to shut out a lot of voices who might be really important in contributing to the conversation. So I think having these smaller groups over Zoom are a really great way to have a more grassroots approach to getting people involved, a lot more conversational based, and I think just an overall healthier approach to politics.
This really weird toxic thing that's come in the last few years is it really does need to be confronted. As a student of history, watching our neighbors to the south and the unraveling of their society, it really is. It's not hyperbole to say that this really is how it begins, and it needs to be confronted and dealt with. Personally, every time I see someone roll their eyes, I add 4 minutes to the length of my speech because I'm not going to be silenced, but
Dalton.
I just have a story to add. Like Mitch might remember this from my first AGA back in North Bay. He asked me to speak on a resolution that was to change the voting age for youth from 16 to 14. And at the time I was only 15. I spoke against that motion and against that resolution. And afterwards, I had a lot of people, not a lot of people know this, but I had a lot of people coming up to me, or not even just coming up to me, but walking by me, giving me dirty looks and stuff like that during that AGA, because I was a new face there. It was my first time being there. I was an interim youth rep on the council at the time. And I think, but after I did that and got up and showed people that I wasn't afraid to state my mind and how I felt about that, because what I recall saying was people at that age most likely won't understand what a lot of the platforms are and of our presidential candidates and that sort of stuff there. But yeah, I got a lot of backlash on that sort of stuff, and at the start when I was first getting into everything, it was hard to take that like criticism from people that I've looked up to over the last few years. And now doing like what I've done over the last 10 years with the MNO, I've gotten respect. I've gained my respect and stuff like that from those people that judged me and criticized me back then. Yeah. So I feel it's something that needs to be looked at a lot more.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that's why I wanted to just acknowledge Hannah for having the gumption to do that. I thought it was brilliant. But it is something absolutely that we are dealing with. And it's not just Yana, it's not just young people in that situation. There's a lot of citizens that are, when they're confronted with that kind of ugliness and negativity, they will just turn off and they just won't come back. And we can't afford that. We can't afford to have citizens, be they young or middle-aged or old, saying, I'm not going to get involved, I'm not going to continue to be involved in the MNO because it's a toxic space for me or because it's an unsafe space for me. So that is a really important piece, and we have an obligation to do that and to take care of that. And so that's what we're doing through this code of conduct. But it is going to take some time. One of the reasons I wanted to do a youth forum tonight is because I wanted to make sure that we had a chance to talk in a place that was safe and that was accessible and welcoming to be able to have the conversations that we're having tonight. So I take your point, Yana, that this might be a really useful tool to have these kinds of regular check-in calls to make sure that young people are engaged in the dialogue that's happening at the broader community level and that there's a space there for that. And I take your point, Dalton, around how you weathered the storm, but there's a lot of people that wouldn't. There's a lot of people that would just say, you know what, life's too short to have to put up with that kind of stuff, and I'm gonna go do something else. Well, so good for you for sticking it through.
Yeah, like I feel like you're coming to these events and stuff like that not to be judged, but to feel like you belong, and because it's your community. Like we might not be from the same communities, but in retrospect, we're one big community.
That's right.
In my eyes, and we shouldn't be judged for speaking our minds. Yeah. It's not right. It's uncalled for, and it's what scares people away.
Yeah. So what you'll see when you do see the draft code of conduct is we've based it on our statement of prime purpose. We've based it on those Métis values and principles. And if you'll remember the statement of prime purpose, it says things like, above all else, we cherish harmony and peace, right? Those kinds of guidance statements are there in the statement of prime purpose. We've put them up front and center at the start of every PCMNO meeting. That's either read, or sometimes it's played, or sometimes it's just acknowledged. But we have to elevate the level of conduct that we're seeing. And so again, thank you for all of you for showing the leadership to putting that on the table. One of the big things that we need to do with regard to moving forward on self-government is to build our constitution. Before we even get there, though, I think we really need to have conversations about our core self-government agreement, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and what the path forward is. So that is work that we really need to be doing right now. I think this next PCMNO, right out of the gate post-election, they need to be talking about how are we going to get out to the people to talk about core self-government agreement and what it means and what the path is. But when we get to the constitution building piece, and we're going to have to sort of set the table for that, make sure that we're bringing everybody along on that, like what are the principles to guide it. But on the constitution building piece, as I said at the start of the call, it is going to require a lot of engagement with citizens, a lot of conversations. There's a lot of issues we've got to deal with, citizenship being one of them. One of the issues that we've talked about and had challenges around is how do we deal with adoption, as an example. You'll remember, for those of you that were around, PCMNO commissioned a paper on adoption that asked a bunch of questions. It was tabled at the Midland Assembly 2015, maybe. And so there's a lot of questions there that we're going to have to sort through. We're going to have to talk about community acceptance and what that means, because in our definition and our criteria, community acceptance is one component of it, but we really haven't established a community acceptance process. So what should that look like? How does the community accept a citizen? So those are just some of the things that we're going to have to handle within that Constitution. But the Constitution really is the vision for our future government. So what are the levels of government? What are the roles and responsibilities of each? What are the roles within each level of government? How do we make decisions? How do we resolve conflict? How do we deal with the rights of citizens? What are the criteria for citizenship? How do we deal with the rights of citizens? How does our democracy work? All of these things are things that we're going to have to deal with through the Constitution. And so, as you can imagine, these are pretty big conversations. Like, it's a fundamental, who are we? That's part of that conversation, is who are we as Métis? And that is going to be all part of that Constitution building process. So as we're thinking about that, one of the things that I'd like to put to all of you, we can certainly have regular chats, we can have spaces like this. And I think, Yana, you're right. This is a small, comfortable space for young people to come together and to have these conversations. Thanks, Yana. I see you're leaving. So we can do all of that. But one of the things that I do want you to think about is, how do we make sure that young people are fully engaged in this process as we're starting to plan this out and think about and establish that vision? How do we do that? Because I'm telling you, this isn't going to be, there's 31 community meetings around the province and that's how we get to a constitution. There's going to have to be some real dialogue. We're going to have to, we're going to have to do some drafting and throw spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks. We're going to have something for people to grab onto and hash out, right? And sorting these issues out. And we have to make sure that we're engaging as many citizens as possible. And I truly believe, and you've heard me say this before, that our youth have to be full participants in that process. Because if whatever we come up with, this is not going to be something that's around for the next 5 or 10 years. Our Constitution is going to be around for a long time. So you're inheriting this. You're the leadership. Hannah, you're going to be doing this, right? So you guys are going to be picking this up, and I really think that we need to ensure that we have young people really engaged in that dialogue and in building our Constitution. So that's one of the things that I want you guys to think about. We don't have to come up with answers tonight, and apparently we're going to have tea on a regular basis. But it is one of the things that I want you to be thinking about, because one of the things we're going to have to be sorting out is, how are we moving forward with engagement around Constitution building? And so I am really looking to all of you and your peers for feedback on, how do we make sure that work is happening with young people's involvement?